It was on this day in 1940 that Greek Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas said "ohi," or no, to Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini as he demanded Greece's surrender. This heroic act of resistance changed the course of history as Greece entered World War II and joined the Allied powers in the epic struggle against fascism and Nazism. By saying no to fascism, Metaxas also said yes to freedom and yes to democracy, an ideal born in Greece thousands of years ago that Greeks throughout history have stood ready to defend. The moment that Metaxas rejected tyranny with his one-word rebuke inspired millions. Every year on Oxi Day, we pay tribute to Greece's heroic defense of Hellenic ideals by recognizing men and women around the world who today aspire to live in freedom and build a democracy of their own. This year's honoree holds special significance to me. As a son of Cuban refugees who came to the United States in search of freedom, I am truly moved to see this year's Oxi Foundation Award go to the courageous Cuban activist and artist Luis Manuel Alcántara. For years, Luis Manuel has led an unwavering campaign of defiance against Cuba's dictatorship. Along with his fellow artists in the San Isidro Movement, he has stood up for freedom of expression, democratic values, and the end to the repression that the Cuban people have endured for 7 decades. We saw the impact of San Isidro Movement artists like Luis Manuel this summer in Cuba. On July 11th, Cubans from across their country took to the streets chanting "Abajo la dictadura," or "Down with the dictatorship," and singing the pro-democracy anthem "Patria y Vida," or "Homeland and Life." The Cuban regime responded to these unprecedented protests with its trademark brutality, beating protesters, arresting activists and everyday citizens, and suspending internet services across the island in an effort to silence its people. But the regime could not stop the truth from going viral. Across social media, the world saw the injustice that Cubans live with each and every day. Tonight, Luis Manuel, unfortunately, cannot join us to accept this award. Tonight, he sits in a Cuban jail, a political prisoner of dictator named Miguel Díaz-Canel and a cowardly regime that fears its own citizens. Yet tonight, the courage, unbendable spirit, and leadership of Luis Manuel continues to inspire, for we know that he will never surrender, just like the Greeks before him. Last month, internationally renowned artist and activist Ai Weiwei paid tribute to Luis Manuel, stating that his art, his unignorable fight for freedom of expression, and his uncompromising stance against autocracy reveal the power of resistance. Today, as we honor this power of resistance, we do so knowing that the Hellenic call to freedom has echoed in humanity's heart across countless generations. It most certainly echoes in all of our hearts as we honor Luis Manuel Alcántara on this anniversary of Oxi Day.
On July 10, 2018, a controversial new ruling was first published in Gaceta de Cuba known as Decree 349. Decree 349 requires artists to obtain government approval before performing or displaying their work and explicitly prohibits content which contravenes current legislation. The ruling drew wide criticism and prompted a group of artists from the predominantly black neighborhood of San Isidro to organize the Movimiento San Isidro, or MSI, to protest the state-sponsored censorship the new law imposed. Luis Manuel Alcántara, also known as Luisma, a founder of MSI and self-proclaimed artivist, has continued to exhibit his performance art pieces which criticize the regime in direct defiance of Decree 349. Luisma's performances, as well as the MSI protests he's organized, have been held at highly publicized events, locations, and via social media campaigns in order to draw maximum attention and support for the cause and to shine a light on the oppression imposed by the government. This has also resulted in him becoming a target of harassment, brutality, and incarceration by authorities, with over 20 arrests since 2018, many without cause. In November 2020, rapper and MSI member Denny Solis was arrested and sentenced to 8 months in prison for live streaming himself insulting a police officer who had entered his house without a warrant. In response, Luisma and MSI organized protests outside a police station and went on to lock themselves inside MSI headquarters to stage a hunger strike demanding his release. The demonstration was successful in drawing attention of both the international media and human rights groups, but was interrupted 8 days into the event when Cuban forces raided the building and arrested 14 activists, including Luisma. This is just one example of the relentless courage displayed by Luisma and other MSI members as they face a regime determined to silence them. Their efforts have brought their cause onto the world stage and continues to build momentum and support toward their vision of a free and democratic Cuba. On July 11, 2021, thousands of citizens took to the streets across Cuba in what was the largest protest since Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution. The protest resulted in over 1,000 arrests, including Luisma. Luisma is currently incarcerated in a maximum security prison where he has been held since the July protest and continues to dissent with hunger strikes. While we were not able to reach him directly, thanks to our friends at NDI, we were able to reach those who know him well for comment.
Saludos a todos. Mi nombre es Claudia Ángel Hidalgo, soy curadora y activista miembro del movimiento San Isidro, además pareja del artista Luis Manuel Alcántara. Agradezco en su nombre y en el de todos los que pertenecemos al movimiento San Isidro, así como en nombre de las voces que buscan libertad en Cuba por el otorgamiento de este premio. Este es un reconocimiento a una lucha incansable que pensábamos olvidada y que de alguna manera Luis nos ha mostrado cuán viva está. El pueblo cubano hoy rechaza en un 70% la dictadura dirigida por Díaz-Canel. A lo largo de estos 62 años, el hambre, la exclusión y la represión han sido constantes y brutales. Los artistas hemos sufrido toda clase de violaciones. Sin embargo, no dejamos de alzar nuestra voz por lograr una Cuba en la que podamos elegir libremente el gobierno que queremos. Luis Manuel está preso injustamente desde el 11 de julio. Con serias restricciones en la comunicación con sus visitas y sus abogados, enfrentando además un estado de salud delicado después de contagiarse de COVID. Sin embargo, todos podemos sentir la fuerza de su espíritu que nos impulsa a continuar luchando por su libertad y la de todos los presos políticos. Luis Manuel, si pudiera estar aquí, les haría sentir el inmenso amor que lo motiva a arriesgar su vida por una Cuba diferente. Y como diría él para despedirme y para despedirnos, estamos conectados. Inmensas gracias.
Agradecemos en el nombre de Luis Manuel Alcántara, del movimiento San Isidro y de las voces de los activistas en Cuba que buscan la libertad. Este es un gran reconocimiento a una tradición de lucha enfocada en los derechos humanos, las libertades y la democracia. Luis Manuel Alcántara es un artista afrodescendiente, preso injustamente, es perteneciente a una parte de la población más discriminada por su condición racial. De hecho, 3 de los artistas miembros de San Isidro son afro, están presos hoy. Podríamos estar hablando de la discriminación racial como política de Estado. Pedimos a los gobiernos democráticos del mundo que aún coquetean con la dictadura que hay en mi país, que reconozcan nuestros derechos como artistas y como ciudadanos para una expresión libre. Luis Manuel Alcántara, a pesar de todos los desmanes que está sufriendo en una de las prisiones de máxima seguridad en Cuba, sigue auténticamente centrado como un héroe. Si él estuviera aquí, con su gran energía y conexión, nos estuviera diciendo a todos estamos conectados. Muchas gracias por este gran reconocimiento. Muchas gracias.
Please welcome to receive the 2021 Oxi Courage Award, Anamely Ramos.
Buenas noches, un placer estar aquí y en nombre de Luis Manuel y el Movimiento San Isidro les agradezco. En mayo de 2020, mientras realizaba la segunda de 3 huelgas en un año, Luis Manuel Alcántara me llamaba por larga distancia a México. La seguridad del Estado le había cortado el internet. Solo, sin comer ni beber nada, cercado por la policía y sin poder ver a nadie, Luis Manuel permaneció más de 7 días encerrado en su casa, hasta que se lo llevaron por la fuerza. No hacía esto por capricho, sino porque unos días antes su casa había sido allanada mientras hacía un performance y sus obras habían sido destrozadas. Para Luis, sus obras son como hijos. Ellas resumen lo mejor de su energía. Son la síntesis perfecta entre lo que quiere dar al mundo y lo que recibe de él.
Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here. On behalf of Luis, I want to thank you. On May 20th, during what would be the second of his 3rd hunger strike that year, Luis called me because his internet had been cut off by state security forces. And he would be there for 7 days without eating, without drinking anything, and surrounded by the police. He was not doing this on a whim. This happened because while he was doing a performance, the police raided his home days prior and destroyed much of his work of art. For him, his pieces of art encapsulate the perfect synthesis between what he wants to give the world and what the world gives to him. They are his children.
En esos días aislados, Luis repetía una y otra vez que él no quería ser un fantasma social, que estaba listo para morir y volver como lluvia o flor y seguir siendo útil al mundo de otras maneras. De esas llamadas entrecortadas que me hacía, escribí varios textos a manera de diario indirecto. Si él no podía hablarle al mundo, trataría de hacerlo por él. Uno de sus textos se llamaba «Opongo unas puertas humanas a los círculos concéntricos de la represión». Quería resaltar la tensión entre estos dos espacios, el del cuerpo vulnerable pero valeroso de Luis, capaz de abrir en torno a sí un universo libre, y el mundo de afuera, lleno de policías y violaciones, en el terreno totalitario de un Estado que no solo ha reprimido violentamente a su pueblo, sino que ha asfixiado todas las instituciones e iniciativas sociales autónomas.
In those days of isolation, Luis said over and over again, I do not want to become a social ghost. I am ready to die and come back as rain or as flowers and be useful to the world in another way. And so, because he was unable to communicate with the world, I decided that I would do so for him and kept an indirect diary. One of the texts I called A Contrast Between the Doors to Humanity and the Concentric Circles of Repression. And I wanted to highlight the vulnerability that he has used his body and the opening that he made towards freedom and the outside world of violence and repression by the police, and how these institutions were asphyxiating art and initiatives.
Cuba es un país no solo precario en términos económicos y políticos, es un ambiente donde se hace difícil respirar. La estructura totalitaria obstaculiza los espacios independientes y alternativos y te muestra un camino desde que naces, defender la revolución. En medio de tanta rigidez, Luis Manuel se abrió paso con su talento, simpatía y mucha voluntad. Se hizo artista a pesar de no estudiar en ninguna escuela. Fue capaz de superar sus circunstancias desventajosas, negro, de barrio, de familia humilde, y convertirse en un referente en el arte cubano y en la historia de la libertad en Cuba. Y lo más importante, rompió muchos ciclos de violencia, personales y grupales, y solo con el poder que le daba la creación y la valentía mayor de todas, creer en el arte y en las personas para cambiar el destino. Sucede con él y con otros miembros del movimiento San Isidro, Michael Castillo, en huelga de hambre y sed ahora mismo en un calabozo en Cuba, y Esteban Rodríguez, también preso injustamente. Luis siempre es y será ese niño que hacía esculturas de palos y tiras en sus manos, generando belleza donde otros solo veían pobreza e imposibilidad.
Cuba is a precarious country, not just in terms of politics, but also it is a totalitarian system that hinders creativity and teaches you that you only have one way to defend the revolution. In midst of so much rigidity, Luis Manuel made his way with his talent, his sympathy, and a lot of willpower. He became an artist, despite not studying in any school. He was able to overcome his disadvantageous circumstances, being black, from a poor neighborhood, from a family of limited means, and he has become a referent in Cuban art and in the history of freedom for Cuba. And what's more important, he has broken many circles of violence, both personal and as a group, because with only the power that gave him his creativity and the greatest courage of all, to believe in art and people, to change destiny. It happens to him and to the other members of the San Isidro Movement, to Michael Castillo, who is currently on a hunger and thirst strike in a dungeon in Cuba, and Esteban Rodriguez, who has also been unjustly imprisoned. Luis is and always will be that child who made sculptures with sticks and scraps, using his hands to generate beauty where others only saw poverty and impossible circumstances.
Asimismo es con Cuba. Más allá de los 800 presos políticos, de los juicios sumarios sin defensa, donde pueden condenarte a 6 años por salir con un cartel a la calle, donde las personas hacen huelgas de hambre como último recurso para defender derechos, donde los activistas son cercados en sus propias casas por meses, donde las personas prefieren cruzar el mar o las fronteras con tal de huir. Más allá de todo eso, Luis vislumbra el futuro que construiremos juntos, una Cuba con todos y para el bien de todos.
The same goes for Cuba. Looking beyond the more than 800 political prisoners, beyond the summary trials without defense, where one can be sentenced to 6 years in prison for just taking a sign to the streets, where people go on hunger strikes as a last resort to defend their rights, where activists are imprisoned in their own homes for months, where people would rather cross oceans and seas and borders in order to flee. Beyond all of that, Luis glimpses the future we will build together, a Cuba for everyone that is doing good for all Cubans.
La puerta que mencionaba en el título de mi texto hace referencia a una de las últimas series de dibujos hechas por Luis, puertas de formas extrañas, pero de formas humanas. Siempre he creído que esas puertas de Luis nos señalan una salida a la desesperanza y al conformismo. Para tener de vuelta a nuestro país es necesario primero imaginarlo y también imaginar por dónde saldríamos a la luz.
The doors that I have mentioned in my text referred to the last series of drawings made by Luis, of doors with strange and unconventional shapes, and also forms that remind us of human shapes. I have always believed that those doors, Luis's doors, show us our way out of hopelessness and conformity. To have our country back, we must first imagine what it could be and find the doors that will lead us there.
Como los griegos dijeron Oxi a los nazis, Luis Manuel y el movimiento San Isidro dicen no a la falta de libertad, no a la desesperanza, no al inmovilismo social, no a la dictadura. Que nadie más tenga que soportar la patria con su propio cuerpo, que la patria sea, además de una razón para dar la vida, un lugar amable y digno que todos podamos habitar y construir.
And as the Greeks said Oxi to the Nazis, Luis Manuel and the San Isidro Movement say no to the lack of freedom, the hopelessness and the social paralysis. May no one else have to uphold the homeland with their body, and may the homeland be, besides a place to give your life, a kind and dignified place where we can all inhabit and build a better future.
Libertad y vida para Cuba, libertad para Luis Manuel Otero, para Maite del Castillo, para Esteban Rodríguez, libertad para todos los detenidos en el 11 de julio y todos los presos políticos cubanos, patria y vida. Gracias.
Liberty and life for Cuba, for Luis Manuel, for Michael Castillo, for Esteban Rodriguez, for those detained on July 11th, and all political prisoners. Homeland and life. Thank you.